Yeah, I thought it'd be interesting to come along and share some of our experience at Deeson of digital transformation projects and what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, and some of the observations we've made about how to make them more successful. Does anyone know who Deeson is? Oh, no, I'll do the quick introductory slide just for completeness' sake. So, we are a digital agency based in Canterbury. Work with a range of national and international brands on large complex digital projects, so typically web platforms, internal business platforms with web technologies. I'll talk a little bit more about some of those later on. Work with open source technologies, Drupal and other open source tech, and we are, as of the 17th of December, part of an AIM listed technology group. So we sold out and we're now part of a bigger group, but working autonomously as a small business within that. So that's who we are. Kind of clients we work with. You can see the kind of global reach. We've got some there across Europe. In the UK, we work with people like Barnardo's, Royal Collection Trust, so Buckingham Palace. We run all the ticketing platforms and all the websites for Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, places like that. We run a number of sites for ITV. So if you've ever entered a competition on an ITV television channel on the web, you'll have done it through a platform that we built. We work with Robbie Williams. We work with London Zoo, running their website and ticketing. Who else? University of Oxford, Shepherd Neame. So if you've ever visited the Shepherd Neame pub website, that will be a multi-site platform that we built for Shepherd Neame. So we do quite a lot of work with a number of leading brands. Kind of organisation we are, just to give you a feel, we're quite a different kind of agency because we're very much set up along agile lines and self-organising principles. So we don't tell our teams what to do. We set up each client with a multidisciplinary team covering technology, design, user experience, and then we let that team solve problems for clients, basically. So it's a different kind of organisation to some agencies which are more directional in the way they manage their technology functions. A very flat organisational structure and dynamic and rapidly changing agency. Sometimes the change is the most difficult bit for some of the team to cope with because we do push on really quickly. So that's who we are. But I thought today's talk really is about digital transformation, digital change, and some of the experience that we've had and some of the things we've seen that work well. So who here considers they work in digital transformation? Interesting. Okay, so we've got a pocket of interest over there. I'm not sure there. So who builds new websites for people? Yeah? Okay. So fair amount of web people in the room. Does anyone do CRM work for clients? Yeah? Okay, so yeah, that's good that you put your hands up as well. So ultimately for us, digital transformation, okay, let's be honest, it's the buzzword we all market by because lots of people are talking about it. But what it really means, it's about changing organisations fundamentally using digital technology, which that can be new websites, it can be new intranets, it can be new CRM systems, it can be robotic process automation, it can be applied artificial intelligence, chatbots being the latest frothy thing that's interesting in the market. But it's basically delivering change in organisations to make those organisations more effective. More effective can be more sales, greater conversion, lower cost to handle inquiries. There can be lots of metrics that organisations use. So if we look at, say, some of our public sector work, they judge success very differently to some of our more commercial clients. Buckingham Palace are very interested in digital transformation, but for them, that's very different to, say, digital transformation in ITV. But ultimately, it's change driven by digital. So that's what we mean when we talk about digital transformation. So I want to talk about some failures that we see, and I'm going to try and do this in as little negativity as possible, but ultimately, if you talk about failing, you have to talk about things that go wrong. And the first fail we often see is organisations not defining what actually needs to change, which sounds silly really, but if you're a senior level in an organisation and you know that you need to change something in your business, you've got to have a plan and a strategy for it. A stat here from Wipro, so we're a third of senior leaders believe that a lack of a clear strategy is a key barrier to realising digital potential. It kind of makes sense, but lots of RFPs we receive on the bigger transformation projects, they lack a strategic context. So they sound like interesting projects, but how are they actually tied to what that organisation wants to achieve? And sometimes you go into a project like that and it falters because no one really knows why they're doing it other than someone thought it was a good idea in the first place, and that's one of the challenges that we face. People think it's about technology as well, so digital transformation, everyone goes, it's about a system, it's about putting in a new system, building a new system, integrating a new system, and they forget really that digital transformation is about changing an organisation. And what's an organisation really? An organisation is a bunch of people that are brought together to do something together, effectively, isn't it? So it's not really about the technology. You won't see this very well, but this is a tool we use with our clients when we talk about how ready they are to change digitally. It's called the Digital Maturity Matrix. Came out of charity sector, but actually works in lots of different organisations we consult with. And it looks at different dimensions within an organisation and how ready they are to change for digital. So you can see across the top, technology is the top axis. It goes platforms, audiences, user experience, content, campaigns, analytics, and governance. So those are dimensions through which we look at, or by which we look at an organisation, and we look at how ready they are to change. And not every organisation wants to be fully digital in all of those dimensions, but it forces our clients to think about where they actually want to make that change, because the default being everyone looks at the top one and goes, technology. That's what digital transformation, it's about technology. And actually, it's about all those other things as well. So this is a tool we use to help organisations understand where they are at the moment in terms of digital transformation, but also express where they want to be in the future, and then we can start to plan out interventions that allow us to help them change, which is a way of kind of taking the conversation away from digital transformations about just digital. So you can avoid fail number one by having a clear strategy for what needs to change, and importantly, why. Which sounds like a silly question, but always ask when you're taking on a new project in the digital sphere, well, why are you actually doing this, and why is that important? Who cares about it? And you'll get some very interesting answers if you keep probing on that kind of thing. And the second part of that is, once you've got that information, does it really align with why the organisation exists and the things they're trying to achieve? Because if you get a misalignment there, if they tell you why they want to build a new website, and it doesn't bear any resemblance to what the organisation's trying to achieve, potentially you've got a pet project, which means that at some point someone will lose interest and that project could fail. So it's worth looking at fail number one. Fail number two, lack of focus and trying to do too much. This one's quite a common one, particularly at the moment, because everyone wants pace, everyone wants innovation, everyone wants to move really quickly. People get distracted by shiny stuff. There's always something new and shiny to look at, isn't there? And we see lots of projects fail because people are trying to do too much. We see it in RFPs. Those of you that work in agency environment and see requests for proposals, you will see the laundry list of every single bit of technology or every single thing that you could do that would be interesting stuck in a list of requirements. And that's an example of where people aren't really focusing. So we spend a lot of time, that's a telescope, that's my attempt at a slide about focusing, I think. We spend a lot of time unpicking briefs, because you get those kind of briefs and you have to go back to what do you want to achieve, why do you want to achieve it, and then we start to think, okay, how can we get a focus here? Often for us, that's about breaking big problems into smaller problems. So it's taking what's a massive brief. We want to change the entire end-to-end process for applying for a credit card, for example. Break that into smaller chunks, understand what's happening in each smaller chunk, and tackle each smaller chunk as you go. It's far easier than doing the big piece in one go. Also means you can demonstrate success a lot sooner, because if you create the massive kind of project that's going to run for 12, 18, 24 months, over that time period, organisations shift direction, people move on, it's harder to actually deliver. So trying to get people to focus is really important. Focusing again on value is important as well. So if we're going to do this thing, what value will it give to your business? And the smaller you make those chunks, the easier it is to have that conversation. Things you can do, think about recognising capacity as well. So having conversations with people in organisations about their capacity to deliver change or respond to change is really important. So common one for us is deploying a new CMS, having to train lots of new people, the content editor audience across an organisation. So understanding their current capacity to engage in that kind of training is really important, because often you'll have a digital team or a IT team who are spearheading this project. The marketers are excited because they've got the lovely new designs, everything's going well, until you come to train the people that actually have to enter the content. And you realise they've got 1,000,001 other things to do, and their capacity is actually the constraint on you successfully delivering that change. So having conversations about capacity to engage with change are really important. Clear and measurable goals make sense. And prioritising projects and initiatives at the right level. Often we find that the higher up you go, the more difficult it is to get people to take prioritisation decisions. They won't the senior people don't like to be made to make choices, and actually prioritisation is about making choices. It's about forcing people to think about things they want to do and things they're going to not do. Agile, done properly, means that you have to decide things are important, and you have to say no to some stuff as well. And as an agency, sometimes it's quite hard to make people say no to things, but if you don't do it, you don't force that focus, you don't force that thinking. So we've learnt to say no quite a lot, actually, or help people to say no to their colleagues sometimes as well. And the other one is being prepared to pause and stop things that aren't important. So sometimes you'll have a long-running project that's been going in the background to replace some bit of technology that actually it makes sense to kill that project before you start something new. So helping clients or helping your organisations to actually kill stuff that isn't adding value is really important as well, because all of that is about forcing the focus that you need to avoid fail number 2. Fail number 3, lack of an effective senior sponsor. So most of the projects we do are quite big, which means they involve capital investment, which means someone senior has got to pay for it or has got to get funds from their FD to pay for it. Sometimes we see projects where they haven't got an effective senior sponsor. They haven't got someone who's willing to fight for their cause. Sometimes there's kind of lots of politicking around resources in an organisation. If you haven't got a sponsor who understands their role as a sponsor, that kind of politicking doesn't go very well, and often as an agency you can be on the receiving end of that kind of experience. Sponsors are good at building coalitions with peers, so we work a lot in the cultural sector. And the cultural sector is a particularly tricky sector when it comes to internal politics. It's second only to local government, I think, and central government for politics. And sometimes there's a, be careful what I say, because I'm being mic'd up. There's a large museum in Britain, clues in the name, who are in the process of rebuilding their website. And I think they're on their 3rd attempt at rebuilding it because they've had aborted projects, not because the technology's been poor or the partner's been poor, but because they haven't actually built a coalition among all the different stakeholders they have for building a new museum website. And that's a real challenge, and we see that in lots of institutions. So actually building those supportive coalitions is, as an agency you can help, because as a third party sometimes you can say stuff that in-house people can't, but a sponsor is the person who glues those coalitions together, and that's a real skill. Sponsors have to communicate effectively, and they have to be prepared to work through resistance. A weak sponsor is almost as useless as having no sponsor at all. So sometimes you do need your sponsor to kind of put on his hard hat and actually put on her hard hat and go and fight for you. The other thing sponsors should do is celebrate successes as well. So they should be the people that are really championing the delivery of stuff successfully, particularly early in projects when everyone's a bit nervous, everyone's not sure whether this is going to work out or not. Things they shouldn't do: they shouldn't lose interest, they shouldn't get bored, which sounds silly, but in some of the longer projects sometimes sponsors get bored. They shouldn't change the goalposts. That kind of makes sense, but sometimes if you've got a sponsor who's making you run over there and then suddenly they're saying go over there, that's hard to work with. They shouldn't avoid difficult conversations, so they need to be willing to tackle those kind of conversations about prioritisation or things we shouldn't do. They should go head on into those, and they should also make sure they set expectations within kind of mid and frontline management about what's actually going to change. Some of our experience, or my experience, having done contact centre change in local government, was about this. So this is where there was a centrally planned piece of change about putting in a new contact centre system, FAQ system, CRM system at the back end, big complex change. No one really engaged with the people that were doing the work, basically. So you had this kind of grand plan and no one was really talking to the people involved, the supervisors, about the work that was involved. And that ultimately kind of ground to a messy halt before we worked through that kind of issue, and it lacked that senior sponsor. So yeah, make sure you've got a sponsor. So avoid it by getting the right sponsor for your project, telling them what they need to do. Sometimes they may not have done this before, so actually it's your responsibility maybe to help them through that and help and support them where necessary. Fail number 3, resistance to change. Who's had a project where someone said, I don't want to do that, or I don't know why we're doing that, or I'm not doing that? A few hands. So resistance to change is a real challenge, isn't it? And this is where you start to get into thinking about digital transformation not really being about digital, because digital transformation really is about helping people change and helping people cope with change in lots of different ways. Bit small. Is anyone familiar with the change curve? So, say psychological theory, concept based, actually developed around grief. So developed around people that are coping with grief. And it talks about the stages people go through when they're dealing with a change. So the first stage is shock. So you tell someone something's changed. Sometimes there's a shock reaction. Move into a denial reaction. So people can start to say, this isn't happening, or this can't be happening to me, all those kind of things. Frustration, so people start to get a bit frustrated, you go into sort of a depression stage, and then people start to kind of move out of that and start to experiment, find solutions for themselves, and they move into kind of acceptance and integration. So you can use that model in lots of change. If, having done kind of big organisational change, you can see those kind of human reactions when you stand up and say, we're going to put in this system, and this means that your job's going to change, or some of you won't have a job in the future when you get into the really gnarly end of it. And you can go through those stages there. The key thing when you're thinking about a change that's related to digital transformation is accepting people will go through those changes and seeing those things as completely normal, but also recognising what you have to do to help people always take the next step through that journey. So an example where we're replacing a big web system, you don't go in instantly and tell everyone everything's going to change. You help them through their understanding of the change in lots of small steps to give them time to absorb some of these things, particularly where it's very relevant to their job. So, for example, if you're moving from a decentralised content management system where you've got loads of people across an organisation, all of whom see content management as a part of their job, and you're moving to a central digital team in your transformation, those people are going to be worried about their jobs. It kind of makes sense when you think about it like that. But you've got to see that as a communication task about helping them along that journey, not just telling them you used to do this and now you're not going to do it. And I've seen it done really crudely, and that's where this kind of thing fails, because then you end up with some of that kind of politicking going on where there's a kind of a backlash against the project because you haven't managed that change, even though that change may be entirely rational from an organisation point of view. So thinking about the change curve is a really useful tool in lots of different senses. So understand the change process and plan accordingly. Use getting buy-in as a way of starting change. So actually having conversations with people before you make that change, before you deploy a new website, take away people's mobile phones, whatever it is you want to do in the digital transformation. Giving effective people the right info at the right time. So again, understanding that sometimes they don't need to know everything on day one. You need to tell them some stuff, let them get their heads around it, and then tell them more detail later on. And sometimes when you've got resistance, which we all get resistance in all sorts of different situations in the workplace, really seeking to understand why people are resisting is really important. And it's strange sometimes when some of the team at Deeson are working on projects and things are difficult and people aren't playing ball and it feels hard. I always say to them, you've got to try and go behind and ask lots of questions, ask lots of open questions, and really try and understand why people are resisting. Because 9 times out of 10, it's not because they're difficult people, it's because they've got something that's really bugging them that they don't understand and they're fearful. And if you can get behind that and understand the real reasons, then you can start to work with that resistance and overcome it. So ultimately, it's about people-related change, and understanding people is the way to deal with it. So finally, fail number 5. This is about culture in organisations, which is one we come up against a lot in digital transformation. So we think it's about digital, we think it's about systems, we think about new and shiny features and functionality. But actually, real digital transformation work is about changing cultures in organisations. So what do we mean by culture? We call it kind of values and behaviours that define how things get done. So every organisation has a culture. It may be an implicit culture that's just evolved over time. It may be a culture that has been set deliberately, and everything that the organisation does is aligned with that culture. Every organisation has a culture. It's something to work with. But what's a digital culture mean in practice? This is a tool we use with our clients early on to start to understand who they are and how their culture relates to digital. And there's a number of kind of dimensions to it. So we ask them about their orientation as an organisation. Are they a really inward-looking organisation, or are they an outward-looking organisation that's looking at their customers, always seeking to understand their customers? The clue with all these is the further to the right they are, the more digital they are. What's their approach to control or delegation? So a strongly digital culture will be a strongly delegated culture in our experience. So an organisation where people at lower levels in the hierarchy, if you want to look at it that way, are very empowered through budget, decision-making, voice, but they are empowered. A less digital culture will typically be more command and control. Digital culture is typically a more bold one. The whole thinking around experimenting or testing and learning and iterating products, digital products, that implies a boldness. A culture in an organisation that's afraid of getting stuff wrong can be a challenge, and that's a less digital culture. Excuse me. This is one we see a lot, particularly in the public sector, the bias between planning and actually doing stuff. Digital cultures typically biased towards getting on with stuff. Now we have to be nuanced about this, because getting on with stuff isn't the same as just doing any old stuff. It's about having a rigorous approach to doing stuff, so you're always understand what you're doing, understanding the lessons you can learn from that, and building that into the loop of learning so you can then go and do something different. But there are a lot of organisations that we have worked with where planning is a business in itself. You spend more time planning than you actually get doing, and that's obviously not the digital culture that we are seeking to work with. And the final dimension we audit our clients on, some of our clients I should say, is around the collaboration versus individual action one, which is more subtle than just digital's over at the right hand side, but typically the more digitally able organisations tend to be over on the right hand side, focusing on collaboration. So it's a tool we use to help organisations look and understand their own culture, because they may not have articulated it in the way that we look at it here, and then we can start to say, okay, well, if you have a bias towards control, how can we work with that to try and move it to a more digitally focused culture in the longer term, which gives us the opportunity to overcome the kind of risks that come with that kind of failure. So, avoiding fail number 5 by understanding the current culture, thinking about what needs to change, and actually talking about culture as a thing, and then talking about how you can change it. Shifting culture through many small interventions. So I've seen too many culture change programs which are a big kind of top-down, this is our new set of values and this is what we're going to do, and everyone's going to fall in with that. In my view, that's not the way to change culture. Lots of little small interventions, lots of bottom-up interventions, lots of small things is the way that we actually shift culture, because ultimately culture is the way people behave, and most of us don't work in organisations where people actually do what you tell them, even if you tried to tell them what to do. So small interventions. And final point, reinforcing culture change through positive role modelling. So if you are visible in an organisation, like your sponsor might be on a big transformation project, you need them to behave consistently with the values you're setting out for your culture, which again sounds obvious, but sometimes sponsors can get a bit lost on the way. You need to remind them that the decisions they make, the things they say, their body language in meetings, all those kind of things have a real impact on our ability to shift culture and deliver change. So that was my canter through 5 fails of digital transformation. Now I've got onto the recruitment pitch.
Why is everyone doing that tonight?
Strange, isn't it? We'll start the new year. I'll keep it brief. We are hiring in Canterbury for technical roles, lead developers, senior developers and delivery manager, and we will pay anyone £500 who introduces anyone that goes on to join Deeson. There we go. So yeah, happy to take any questions now.
Thank you. Any questions out there? What's the most complicated transformation project you've done, or like how much did you have to pare them back from what they wanted?
Buckingham Palace. So when we took on Buckingham Palace, they had a failing website that wasn't working. They had a failing integration with their collection system, and they were not able to effectively sell tickets. So basically every part of the system we became responsible for was broken. And in that situation, they wanted everything fixed overnight. And we had to kind of break it down and say, we can't do that. There's so many different moving parts in there. Let's focus on the thing that's most important to you. And that was quite an exercise in actually kind of getting the right people in the room to determine what collectively was most important. They're a large cultural organisation with lots and lots of interest groups, let's say that.
Did you meet the Queen?
I didn't meet the Queen, but I have gone to meetings in the room. You know where the balcony is in Buckingham Palace? Yeah. The room behind there is just a meeting room, usually. So I've stood there and done presentations like this. It's not, Buckingham Palace inside is quite, not run down, but it's quite old. Anyway. But the best bit is in that room, to the right of the window, there's a little cupboard, and if you open it, there's a phone to the red arrows. So when it's the phone that goes off when the red arrows are coming overhead, so you know when they come out, it's the phone that rings.
So you can go and, I've just finished the meeting, come on then!
I didn't dare pick it up actually. So.